Deputy Stephen Donnelly, and you're sharing time with Finian McGrath and Deputy Seamus Healy. You have 30 minutes among three, so that's
Thanks, Chair.
10 minutes each.
Deputy Healy's going to take 10, Deputy McGrath's going to take 7. I'll take 13. You might tell me when I've about 2 minutes.
Okay, well, that's agreed then. Okay.
It is. Thank you. Here, I welcome the bill as a small step on the need for very significant budgetary reform, although I have some very specific concerns with the bill. And I have to say, it is a little bit ironic, and I say this with the greatest respect to Minister McGinley, that Minister Howlin came in here, gave us a speech which included saying things like, we've introduced a number of important budgetary reforms aimed at enhancing the openness and transparency of the budgetary framework. And then at the start of Deputy McDonnell's speech, left and was replaced by a Minister of State for the Gaeltacht. Now, there's only 3 opposition TDs on Minister Howlin's subcommittee, Deputy Fleming who spoke, Deputy MacDonald and myself. And again, I say this with the greatest respect. It has nothing to do with Minister McGinley. I think it sets the tone which Deputies MacDonald, Fleming and myself are talking to, which is there's a lot of big talk from this government, but there is a culture and actions which belie those words. They say they're listening and then leave the chamber. So I have to say, Mr. Howlin leaving at the start of Deputy MacDonald's speech perfectly illustrates the problem we have. So we know that serious budgetary reform is badly needed. We scored in 2005 in the lowest quartile in the world by the World Bank. We're in the same category as Greece, Cambodia and Kenya. In 2006, in an index of legislative capacity, we scored 0 out of 10 in the quality of information given to Parliament to assess budgets, and we scored 0 out of 10 in the time given to Parliament to assess budgets. In another study of the OECD and other countries, we came second last, 35th out of 36 countries. The only country that manages to do budgets worse than us was South Africa. So we're absolutely appalling at doing this. And previous governments and I would have to say officials are to blame for this. We're shocking at it. There is a culture of secrecy and protection of information that is quite extraordinary. Now, Minister, your own programme for government states, quote, we will open up the budget process to the full glare of public scrutiny in a way that restores confidence and stability. I've got to tell you, I've spent several years working in numbers and budgets and financial analysis, both in the public and the private sector, and nothing about this process instills confidence in me or would lead me to believe that it would instill stability by exposing the budgetary process to the full glare of the public. So it was promised and it is wanted. Minister Howlin regularly makes speeches like he's just made, telling us that he's trying to do everything he can. Opposition TDs, like Deputy Fleming, Deputy MacDonald and myself, are constantly asking for improvements, though we don't seem to get them. And we know the government backbenchers are looking for reform. I read in the Irish Times this morning that the Fine Gael party there was a surprising amount of support for Deputy Murphy's proposals for political reform. So we know it's wanted on all sides of the House. We know it's been promised. We know we're really bad at it, and we know it would make a big difference, and yet it doesn't seem to happen. And I have to say, this bill isn't going to do it either. Now, Minister, I'll put 2 reasons for this, or I'll put together two buckets of reasons. The first is the mechanics of the process, but actually much more important than the mechanics of the process, which are really bad. They are getting better, but they're still really bad, is the culture within which it happens. And really, the culture is the biggest issue. Without changing the culture, nothing's going to change. So if we go to the minister's speech, he says, and I quote, we, the government, have done the following: completely modernised and reformed the annual estimates process, built performance-related information into the heart of the budgetary documentation, and brought evidence-based policy making to the forefront of public service delivery. Absolute nonsense. Completely modernised and reformed the annual estimates process. No, he hasn't, and no, this government hasn't. I'm heavily involved in that process, and it's still a shambles. build performance-related information into the heart of the budgetary documentation. I've gone through in detail the document that Minister Howland showed, which is the revised estimates. There are a few performance-related metrics in there, but nothing serious, nothing that you could actually hold anyone to account on. And I think the font is probably about 4 or 6. Certainly, you wouldn't want to be hard of sight trying to see it. It is a dense, impenetrable document, which certainly I've years of experience in interrogating financial information, and it was impossible for me to use the documentation that was provided by the Minister to try and hold him to account, which is part of my constitutional role. And as for evidence-based policy making, you know, Deputy MacDonald pretty much summed it up. There may be evidence-based policy making, but if there is, the evidence has been kept from us. And Minister Howland is on the record as explicitly refusing to share with me evidence of policy making. When he came along with the capital expenditure programme, a vast amount of money, I asked for a technical appendix, I asked for cost-benefit analysis, I asked for decision criteria, and he said I couldn't have it. He said it'd be too complicated for me to understand, and I couldn't have it. And that's just one example. So I have to say, I simply do not buy that the government has completely modernised the process, built in performance-related budgeting and brought evidence-based policy making to the forefront of public service. Certainly as a member of Dáil Éireann, I don't see it. Deputy Fleming's points are well made. There's a huge amount of non-voted expenditure which Dáil Éireann doesn't get to see. That needs to be stopped. And then I'd like to draw your specific attention, Minister, to the bill. Section 1, parts 5 and 8, and this is kind of segues into the culture. I'll read it out for you. The Minister for Finance shall, on behalf of the Government, / Cabinet, inform Dáil Éireann of a decision under subsection X and Y as soon as the decision has been made. Let's just think about this for a second. The only institution in this country that can authorise public spending is Dáil Éireann. It's in the Constitution. Now, the government, for all of the money that's gone to the banks, the previous government, supported by this government, passed an act that bypassed Dáil Éireann and said the Minister for Finance can spend any amount of money he wants on the banks for any reason at any time he wants. And we're €64 billion into that particular act of lunacy. And all he has to do is inform Dáil Éireann. Well, let's take a look at this bill. That's what it says again. It doesn't say Dáil Éireann must approve these binding estimates and ceilings and very important multi-annual targets. It says the government will agree them, and then they'll tell us. They'll come in here and inform us as to what's going to happen in the country. So we're hardwiring the same problem into the bill. Now let's talk about the culture. Last week, I asked Minister Noonan if, when the Stability Programme update, which is a very important financial document, like in this bill, it is a multi-year financial medium-term estimate, which goes to the European Commission and can come back with country-specific recommendations, which are binding. I asked Minister Noonan if next year the Dáil could have more than the 2.5 hours notice we got and more than the 1 hour's worth of committee debate. And Minister Noonan said, and I quote, "We brought it into you at the first available opportunity. I don't think you were inhibited in any way whatsoever. A wrangle about process rather than dealing with the document is a waste of time." That's what we're dealing with. I got to talk about it for 5 minutes. I got the document 2 hours before committee, and it got sent off in its already printed form, so there wasn't really any Oireachtas oversight. He was just putting it under our nose, kind of an hour before he emailed it to Brussels. That's what he said. He basically said, stop wasting my time. He wouldn't give any comfort to me that the deputies of Dáil Éireann would be allowed to look at this very important document. I asked the Taoiseach about 2 weeks ago if the budget was going to be signed off in October the 15th, and he said it is. Now let's think about this. The point of the European semester is to try and drive good budgetary practice into countries like Ireland and coordinate it. Now, what's required is that a draft budget is sent to Brussels on the 15th of October. In other countries, that's what's going to happen. In other countries, they'll send off a draft, their parliament will debate it, it'll be changed according to parliamentary input and oversight, and then it'll be passed in December. That's not what we're doing. What the government has decided to do is to avoid the intent of parliamentary oversight and shift budget day up to the same day that we have to submit it to Brussels. I asked Minister Howland some months ago in committee if he would consider adding to one of the referendums, removing this ridiculous piece in the Constitution that says only a minister can propose an amendment that incurs a charge on the state. Absolutely preposterous. None of us can suggest anything that costs any money. And Minister Howland basically said, he said no, because if he was to allow that, sure, every deputy would just spend all their time proposing silly things that cost loads of money or reduce taxes. And then, as Deputy MacDonald has pointed out, the last year's budget is a perfect example of the culture of locking out the Parliament, and not just this side of the House, every deputy, from the budgetary process. There were guillotines used on everything. We got practically no time to talk on the social welfare bill, on the finance bill, on the local property bill. These things were just rushed through the House. So, Minister, I know you're in a different ministry. I'm not quite sure why Minister Howland isn't here, but maybe you or his officials or someone can take back to him the fact that his own backbenchers and the Fine Gael backbenchers and us in opposition want a modern budgetary process, which he claims to have already done. It's not happening. The culture in this House does not appear to have changed. The culture at the top, the Economic Management Council, is controlling. It is stifling debate, and it is shutting the Parliament out. And we see it repeated in this bill. The Minister shall, on behalf of the government, inform Dáil Éireann of a decision. Here we go again. Now, I'd like to propose a few things, Minister, which you might be able to take back. One is that the budget does not get passed in October. Thank you. The other is that the Stability Programme update does not get waved under the noses of the Finance Committee 60 minutes before it's sent off to Brussels next year. And I would emphasise there are binding recommendations can come back from Brussels based on that document. I would fully agree with the call for equality budgeting to be brought in as well. And then finally, if we want to look at what best practice is meant to be, here's what the OECD says, and I quote, "In no case should the budget be submitted to parliaments for review less than 3 months prior to the start of the fiscal year." Now, as Deputy Fleming has said, in June we're going to be looking at this year's estimates. It says non-financial performance data, including performance targets, should be presented for expenditure programmes where practical. A little bit of that happening, but nothing that I've seen that I could usefully use to hold a minister or a department to account. It says comparative information on actual revenue and expenditure during the past year and an updated forecast for the current year should be provided for each programme. It says there should be monthly reports showing progress in implementing the budget. Thank you. And it says there should be a parliamentary budget office set up, which would allow the rest of us, both government backbenchers and in the opposition, to interrogate a budget properly. So I just conclude by saying this is being brought in because Europe says we have to do it. But the culture of this bill is government's in charge, nothing really for Dáil Éireann to see here. I don't accept that, whilst I do accept that the process is getting better, I do accept that, I want to say that I absolutely refute the idea that we are anywhere close to good international practice, and the culture at the top is stifling this House doing its job. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.